I never thought I'd land a job at a place like this. Honestly, I wasn't even supposed to be here. I was 3 months out of college, living in a shoebox apartment with thin walls, stale air, and the constant drip of a leaky faucet I couldn't afford to fix. My degree in applied sciences hadn't done much for me yet. Job boards were clogged with postings that wanted 5 years of experience for entry-level roles. I was running out of savings and out of excuses when I saw the ad pinned to a corkboard outside a laundromat. It was printed on cheap paper, the kind that curls at the edges when it absorbs too much humidity, and all it said was, "Technician needed. No prior experience required. Apply in person. Good pay." There was no phone number, no email address. Just a time, a date, and an address at the bottom. I almost laughed. It smelled like a scam, but something about it hooked me anyway. Maybe it was desperation. Maybe it was fate. The address led me out of town to a blocky building squatting at the edge of an industrial park. The windows were tinted black, the kind that reflects your face back at you when you're trying to look in. There was no sign, no logo. Just a steel door with a card reader. When I knocked, a man opened it almost instantly, as though he'd been waiting on the other side. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a lab coat with an ID badge clipped to the pocket. His hair was neatly combed, but his eyes were restless, flicking around the parking lot before settling back on me. "You're here for the position," he said. Not a question. I nodded. "Good. Come in." The door shut behind me with a heavy clunk, and suddenly the air changed. It was cooler, drier. The lighting inside hummed faintly, sterile white. I followed the man down a long corridor lined with frosted glass windows. On the other side, shadows shifted, too tall, too thin. I didn't want to look too closely. He led me into a small office with a metal desk and a stack of papers. "Sit," he said, motioning to a chair. The interview, if you could even call it that, lasted 5 minutes. He didn't ask me about my background, didn't ask what I knew, didn't even ask why I wanted the job. Instead, he slid a form across the desk. It was already filled out with my name, address, and date of birth. My stomach dropped. I hadn't told them any of that. Still, I signed where they wanted me to. What else could I do? When the paperwork was done, he stood and handed me a laminated sheet. "Read this. Memorize it. These are the rules. You'll find that here, the rules are more important than the science." The sheet was heavier than I expected, the lamination thick, as though it had been handled thousands of times. The font was clean, clinical. The words less so. Rules for research lab technicians, laminated sheet. Rule number 1. If a test subject speaks in your voice, pull the alarm and evacuate immediately. Do not hesitate. Rule number 2. Always check your reflection before clocking out. If it lags, do not leave the building. Wait inside until it corrects. Rule number 3. Never read the test data in full. Summaries only. If curiosity tempts you, remember, the last technician won't stop screaming. Rule number 4. During night shifts, if you hear typing from Lab 3, ignore it. No one is assigned there after dark. Rule number 5. If you find a keycard with your name on it that you didn't request, destroy it. Do not use it. Rule number 6. The elevator sometimes stops on floor B2. There is no floor B2. Stay inside until it resumes moving. Rule number 7. At 3:15 a.m. exactly, all security cameras go static. Stand still until they return. Movement attracts attention. Rule number 8. When handling test subjects, wear your badge facing outward. They know if you forget. I stared at the sheet for a long time, trying to process the words. At first, I thought it was some kind of hazing ritual or maybe a sick joke played on the new hires. But when I glanced up, the man was watching me with absolute seriousness. "Do you understand?" he asked. I think so. "No. Don't think." "No." There was no room for humor in his tone. My throat felt dry. I nodded. "Good. Memorize them. You'll see soon enough why they matter." He introduced himself as Dr. Kepler, though he said I wouldn't be working with him directly. My assignment would be under another supervisor, a woman named Dr. Mercer. Before he sent me off, he leaned in slightly. "A word of advice. Never convince yourself the rules are exaggerated. They aren't. The rules are survival." Dr. Mercer was waiting for me in one of the labs. She looked younger than Kepler, but sharper somehow, like a knife kept just on the edge of sharpness. Her hair was tied back in a bun, safety goggles perched on her forehead. She shook my hand without smiling. "You're the new technician." "Good. We've been short-staffed." The lab wasn't what I expected. No rows of bubbling beakers, no chalkboard scribbled with formulas. Instead, it was cold and quiet, full of sealed chambers with thick glass walls. Each chamber contained something different, Some held animals, others. I wasn't sure what they held. Shapes hunched in the shadows, moving just enough to prove they were alive. Dr. Mercer showed me the workstation where I'd be assigned. A small desk with a computer, stacks of data reports, and a monitor showing security feeds from the chambers. You'll log the subject's vitals, she explained. Heart rate, brain activity, behavior patterns. But remember Rule 3, summaries only. Don't read the data in full. She didn't elaborate and I didn't ask. That night, when my shift ended, I walked toward the exit and caught sight of my reflection in a window. I almost didn't look. Reflections are something you take for granted, right? But rule number 2 echoed in my head, so I stopped. For a moment, everything seemed normal. My reflection moved when I did. It blinked when I blinked. But then, just for half a second, it didn't. My reflection lingered, staring at me with a delay that froze my blood. I didn't clock out. I stayed in the building, sitting at my desk until the fluorescent lights began to flicker and reset. When I checked again, my reflection was back to normal. I told myself it was exhaustion, my mind playing tricks after a long day. But deep down, I knew. The rules weren't a joke. And I was trapped in this place with them. They told me the first few weeks would be the hardest. Adjustment, they called it. But you don't adjust to a place like this. You endure it. Every morning I'd badge in, walk past the tinted glass, and force myself to look straight ahead. I'd feel the shadows inside those observation chambers leaning closer to the glass, watching me. I told myself I was imagining it, that no one could notice me specifically out of the dozens of staff here. But when your gut tells you that unseen eyes are following you, your gut is usually right. Dr. Mercer ran me like clockwork. She wasn't unkind, just clinical, efficient. She gave instructions, corrections, the occasional sharp glance when I hesitated too long at a console. I quickly learned that hesitation was dangerous here. The laminated sheet of rules stayed folded in the pocket of my lab coat. Even after memorizing them, I couldn't bring myself to throw it away. Every so often, my fingers would brush against the plastic, grounding me like a talisman. The rules didn't feel optional anymore. They felt like a lifeline. The first time I almost broke one was during my 3rd week. I'd been assigned to monitor subject 27, one of the few specimens that still looked almost human. A young woman, maybe in her 20s, though her skin had gone pale and waxy, veins like fine cracks beneath the surface. Electrodes tracked her brainwaves as she sat motionless in her chamber, eyes fixed on the far wall. She hadn't moved in the 3 nights I'd watched her. The stillness made me uneasy. It was the kind of silence that made you want to lean in closer to know more. So I did what I shouldn't have. I opened her file. The data logs came in packets, neatly labeled, summary reports. That's what I was supposed to read. But below those was another folder, full reports. The temptation was unbearable. Just a few lines, I told myself. Just a glimpse. I clicked. The screen filled with scrolling text, streams of numbers, detailed vitals, long paragraphs of observations. My eyes skimmed greedily at first, then slowed. Something was wrong. The words weren't all scientific. Interspersed with the data were sentences that had no business being there. Sentences that read like whispers. She knows your name. She's been waiting for you. Look at her eyes. My breath hitched. My gaze snapped up to the chamber window. Subject 27 had turned her head. For the first time in weeks, she wasn't staring at the wall, she was staring directly at me. And her lips were moving. No sound came through the glass, but I knew what she was mouthing. My name. I slammed the window closed, heart jackhammering against my ribs. The whispers still crawled across the screen. I yanked the power cord from the computer, sending the monitors into black silence. When I turned back, subject 27 was motionless again, eyes blank, facing the wall. I didn't tell Dr. Mercer what I'd done. I didn't have to. The next morning, she stopped by my workstation and laid a hand on the desk, fingers tapping once, sharply. Summaries only, she said without looking at me. Then she walked away. It wasn't just me who struggled. I began to notice the other technicians, the little ways they were unraveling. One man, Harris I think his name was, kept rubbing his badge against his shirt over and over as if polishing it. When I asked why, he whispered, "If they can't see it, they won't let me sleep." A woman named Ortiz started carrying 2 laminated sheets, hers and another that wasn't hers. She clutched them like prayer books. When security tried to confiscate the extra, she screamed until her voice broke. Most of the others avoided eye contact altogether, as if acknowledging each other might invite disaster. I told myself I was stronger, that I could follow the rules better than they could. But the truth is, the rules gnawed at me in quiet ways. Rule number 3 especially. Once you know there's something hidden in those files, it's hard to stop thinking about them. Like a locked door in your own home, every time you pass it, you wonder what's on the other side. And then there was rule number 1. If a test subject speaks in your voice, pull the alarm and evacuate immediately. That one sat heavy in my mind. Too specific to be arbitrary. Too terrifying to ignore. During one late shift, I swear I heard something, faint, distorted, through the speakers that monitored Subject 12's chamber. Just a breath at first, then a whisper. Hey. My own voice. The air left my lungs in a rush. My hand hovered over the alarm button, trembling. But then the sound cut out. Silence. The subject was still, strapped to a chair, electrodes humming quietly. I waited, sweating, hand frozen in place for what felt like hours. No repeat. Nothing. Finally, I lowered my hand. I didn't pull the alarm. Not that time. But I should have. By the end of my first month, sleep became a stranger. I'd close my eyes and see reflections lagging a half-second behind me, hear keystrokes echoing from empty labs. Sometimes, in the middle of the night, my phone would buzz with messages that disappeared before I could open them. Just white noise, flickering text. One evening, while leaving, I checked my reflection as rule number 2 demanded. It looked fine. Perfectly fine. I exhaled in relief, turned to swipe out, and caught the faintest delay. Not in my body, not in my eyes. In my smile. For just a heartbeat, the reflection kept smiling after my mouth had gone slack. I didn't leave. I stayed in the building until morning, pretending to review summaries, pretending I wasn't losing my grip. That night, Harris didn't show up for his shift. His workstation was empty, badge still hanging on the hook. No one said a word. By morning, Ortiz had vanished too. Her laminated sheets sat on her desk, edges worn down to threads. I wanted to ask where they'd gone, but every time I opened my mouth, the words dried up in my throat. Maybe they'd broken the rules. Maybe they'd been escorted out. Maybe worse. I started wondering if the lab didn't just employ technicians. Maybe it consumed them. And I knew it was only a matter of time before it tried to consume me. The lab after midnight was different. In the daytime, there were at least people, scientists bustling between chambers, the hum of conversation in the halls, the scrape of shoes on polished tile. But on the night shift, that thrum of life bled away, leaving only silence and machinery. The fluorescents hummed overhead, steady as a heartbeat, and the only footsteps I heard were my own. That should have been comforting. Silence means nothing's happening, right? But in this place, silence meant you could finally hear the other sounds. The ones that weren't supposed to be there. That was when I first noticed the typing. It was faint at first, no louder than a whisper against the keys of a distant typewriter. A steady clack clack clack, like someone furiously transcribing a thought before it could slip away. It was coming from Lab 3. Rule number 4 surfaced in my head like a knife rising through water. During night shifts, if you hear typing from Lab 3, ignore it. No one is assigned there after dark. I froze in the hallway, the laminated sheet heavy in my pocket. My better judgment told me to keep walking, to pretend I hadn't heard it. But curiosity, that was the real hazard here. It's easy to follow rules when you know why. It's harder when all you have are vague warnings and whispers of danger. I tried to ignore it. Truly I did. I turned away, walked down the hall toward my workstation. But the typing didn't stop. It grew louder, more urgent, like fingers hammering against keys, frantic to be heard. And then the sound shifted. The rhythm broke, slowed, and began to match the beat of my own pulse. Each clack landed in sync with my heartbeat, echoing in my skull until I couldn't tell which was which. I stopped walking. My palms were slick with sweat. Against every instinct of survival, I turned back. Lab 3 was identical to every other research chamber. Frosted glass walls, sealed door with a keycard reader, security camera angled down like an unblinking eye. But the lights inside were off. I stood there, listening to the furious keystrokes rattling from within the dark. The sound shouldn't have carried through the glass, but it did, sharp and crisp, as though I were standing right beside the desk inside. And then I realized something that made my stomach flip. There was no desk in Lab 3. I'd been in there once during training. The chamber had been stripped bare, just an empty cot, a steel drain in the floor, and restraints bolted to the wall. No furniture. No electronics. Nothing that could make the sound of typing. My breath fogged against the glass. Ignore it, I told myself. Rule 4. Ignore it. I forced my feet to move, forced myself to turn away. I didn't look back. But the typing followed me. I made it to my workstation, sat down, and tried to drown it out by flipping through summary reports. Subject 27's vitals. Stable. Subject 12. Elevated heart rate. Subject 45, non-responsive. But beneath the summaries, faint words bled into my vision, ghosting across the screen in the spaces where there should have been blank white. Why didn't you answer? Come see what we're writing. We have your words now. I blinked hard, rubbed my eyes. When I looked again, the words were gone. Just summaries. Clean, clinical, normal. The typing had stopped. For the rest of the shift, I kept one hand on the alarm switch, knuckles white, waiting for the sound to return. It didn't. But silence was no comfort anymore. Silence was worse. The next morning, I cornered Dr. Mercer in the hall. Can I ask you something? I said, trying to keep my voice steady. She gave me a flat look. As long as it's not about the rules. It is about the rules. Her gaze sharpened the way a scalpel catches light. Then you should already know the answer. I heard typing. From Lab 3. She didn't blink. Didn't shift her weight. Didn't even breathe differently. And did you follow Rule 4? Yes. Then you're still alive. That's the point. I swallowed hard. But what's in there? Why typing? She leaned in close, her breath cold against my ear. Curiosity is how this place eats people. Do you want to be eaten? I couldn't answer. Good, she said, pulling back. Then don't ask again. And just like that, she was gone. That night, I did everything in my power not to walk near Lab 3. I kept my head down, focused on the summaries, checked my reflection every half hour as if that could save me. But the typing returned. This time it wasn't frantic. It was steady, deliberate. The pace of someone calmly composing. And worse, it wasn't random anymore. It spelled my name. Clack, 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 stop. Clack, 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 pause. I knew the rhythm of the letters. Letter by letter, it hammered my name into the darkness. I pressed my palms against my ears until they ached. But even then the sound carried through, vibrating in my bones. Rule number 4 screamed in my mind, but so did something else, something louder. I needed to know what was writing in there. I needed to see. At 2 a.m. I found myself back outside Lab 3, staring into the dark chamber. My keycard trembled in my hand, the black strip hovering inches from the reader. I don't know how long I stood there, frozen between survival and ruin. The typing slowed. One final keystroke echoed through the chamber. Then silence. The reader beeped softly. For one horrifying second, I thought I'd swiped the card without realizing it. My hand wasn't even on the scanner. But the light blinked green and the lock clicked. The door to Lab 3 slid open. Inside was only darkness. And the faint glow of a monitor waiting to be read. The door to Lab 3 yawned open like a wound. I stood at the threshold, the stale cold of the chamber curling against my skin. My rational mind screamed at me to back away, to slam it shut, to follow the rules. But curiosity is poison. It seeps into your veins, dulls your survival instinct, makes you step forward when you should run. I didn't go inside. Not fully. Just leaned over the threshold, squinting into the dark. And there it was. A desk. It hadn't been there before. I knew this because during orientation I'd walked this chamber with Dr. Mercer. She told me plainly, Lab 3 is dormant. Empty. Ignore it. The room had been barren, bare walls, a drain in the floor, nothing else. But now, in the far corner, sat a metal desk with an old computer terminal. The screen glowed a faint green, pulsing like a heartbeat. The keyboard clacked once on its own. I staggered back, bile rising in my throat. I reached for the alarm, for anything that might save me, but before I could touch it, a shadow moved across the screen, blotting out the glow. The typing stopped. And the door slammed shut. The lock clicked red. My keycard wasn't even in the reader. The next day, I didn't speak to Dr. Mercer about what had happened. I didn't dare. If she knew I'd stood at the edge of breaking rule number 4, she might decide I wasn't cut out for this job. And in this place, not cut out didn't feel like a performance review. It felt like a death sentence. But someone had noticed. When I arrived at my workstation that night, an envelope sat on my desk. No name, no return address. Just a plain white envelope, unsealed. Inside was a keycard. My name was printed on the front in bold, clinical font. Elias Ward, technician. I froze, stomach dropping like a stone. Rule number 5 pounded in my ears. If you find a keycard with your name on it that you didn't request, destroy it. Do not use it. I glanced at my lanyard. My real keycard hung there, familiar weight against my chest. This new one was wrong. The photo wasn't the same. It was close, too close, but the expression in the picture didn't belong to me. My smile was slightly too wide, my eyes just a little too sharp, like I was pretending to be myself. My reflection lagged again when I caught sight of it in the glossy surface of the card. My first instinct was to throw it away. To tear it, crush it, feed it to the shredder. But the envelope hadn't been sealed. Someone wanted me to see this. I slipped it into my pocket instead. The temptation gnawed at me all night. Every time I passed a locked door, the records office, the supply chamber, the restricted observation deck, I wondered, what if the false keycard works? What if it opens the places the real one doesn't? I thought of Lab 3, the desk that shouldn't exist, the typing that spelled my name. What if the card could explain it? What if it could tell me what this place really was? I nearly swiped it. Twice. The first time in front of the stairwell leading to floor B2. The card reader blinked as if it recognized me, as if it was waiting. My hand trembled inches away. Then I remembered rule number 6. The elevator sometimes stops on floor B2. There is no floor B2. Stay inside until it resumes moving. The second time I stood outside the records office, heart pounding in my throat. If I knew more, if I read the files, the histories, the full data, maybe I could survive longer than the rest. Maybe I could leave. But every time I thought about swiping, I saw the reflection in the photo smiling wider than I ever had. That wasn't me. Around 3 a.m. the static hit. All the security cameras went white noise fuzz at once, a blizzard of crackling distortion. I froze. Rule number 7 slammed into my brain. At 3:15 a.m. exactly, all security cameras go static. Stand still until they return. Movement attracts attention. I stood like a statue. My legs screamed, my lungs burned, but I didn't dare twitch. And through the static I saw something. Shapes, flickering in the distortion, moving where no shapes should be. Thin arms too long. Faces pressed against the glass of chambers that should have been empty. And one figure standing right behind me. Tall. Still. Silent. The cameras blinked back to life at 3:16. The figure was gone. When I could finally move, my whole body shook. The false keycard slipped from my pocket and clattered onto the floor. I stared down at it. The photo on the card had changed. It was still me, but now it showed me standing in Lab 3, fingers on the keyboard of the desk that shouldn't exist. I didn't destroy the card. Not yet. Because I had to know, if it could show me there, maybe it could show me more. Maybe the rules weren't just about survival. Maybe they were about keeping the truth buried. And if that was the case, I needed to dig it up before the lab swallowed me whole. I started carrying the false keycard everywhere. Not openly, never clipped to my lanyard where others might see. I kept my real badge displayed as rule number 8 demanded, but the other card stayed in my pocket like a second skin. The longer I had it, the heavier it seemed to get. I could feel it against my thigh with every step, as though it were tugging me downward. Like it wanted to be used. The elevator was the first place it whispered to me. The lab had 4 main levels: ground, B1, B3, and B4. No one spoke about B2 except in the rules. That was how you knew it existed even when they swore it didn't. Rules are never written about nothing. The first time the elevator stopped there, I nearly screamed. It happened suddenly halfway through my shift when I was on my way to drop off reports. The fluorescent light flickered, the gears groaned, and the elevator shuddered to a halt. The display above the door blinked red. B2. My stomach twisted. The laminated sheet in my pocket burned against my skin. Rule number 6. The elevator sometimes stops on floor B2. There is no floor B2. Stay inside until it resumes moving. The air grew colder. The lights dimmed, humming low like a dying bulb. And then the door slid open. At first I told myself not to look. If I didn't look, I could convince myself there was nothing there. That the rules were right and floor B2 didn't exist. But my eyes betrayed me. The hallway stretched out before me, long and dim, lined with rusting pipes. The walls were wet, dripping with condensation. A faint smell of rot crept in, metallic and sour. And there were voices. Not loud, never loud, but soft, layered whispers drifting down the corridor. My name. Over and over, spoken in dozens of different tones. Elias, Elias, Elias. I pressed myself against the back wall of the elevator, nails digging into my palms. Don't move. Don't breathe. Don't listen. The doors began to close. Relief surged through me, until something slid between them. A hand. Pale, thin, too many joints in the fingers. It didn't push the doors back open. It simply held them there, preventing them from shutting. The whispers stopped. The hand began to curl, reaching inward. The elevator lurched violently as though something had kicked it from below. The hand vanished. The doors slammed shut, locking tight. The display blinked. B1. The elevator rose smoothly as though nothing had happened. When the doors opened, I stumbled out, heart pounding, knees weak. I almost kissed the ground. But when I looked down at my pocket, I realized the false keycard was no longer there. I found it again the next morning. It was waiting on my desk, neatly placed in the center of my keyboard. But the photo had changed. Now it showed me standing in that rusted hallway on B2, 1 foot out of the elevator, my face turned toward the shadows. And in the corner of the picture, blurry, half-formed, was a figure. Tall. Bet. Smiling with too many teeth. I should have destroyed the card right then. Rule number 5 wasn't just a suggestion, it was a lifeline. But I couldn't. Because if the card was showing me these places, these moments, then maybe it was also showing me a way through. The rules kept me alive, yes. But they also kept me blind. And I was tired of stumbling through this nightmare half awake. That night, I stepped into the elevator again. I pressed my badge against the reader, not the real one, the false one. The display flickered. The elevator groaned. And when it stopped, the screen read B2. This time I didn't stay inside. This time I stepped out. The air was colder than before, damp enough that it clung to my lungs with each breath. The hallway stretched out endlessly, doors on either side marked with numbers I didn't recognize. Some were ajar, darkness spilling through the cracks. The whispers started again, but they weren't calling my name this time. They were reciting something. Rule number 1. If a test subject speaks in your voice, pull the alarm and evacuate immediately. Rule number 2. Always check your reflection before clocking out. If it lags, stay inside. My own rules. Word for word, chanted by voices that seemed to come from the walls themselves. I gritted my teeth and forced myself forward. At the end of the hallway stood another elevator, smaller, older, its doors dented and scratched. Above it was a panel. No floor numbers. Just a single word. Exit. The whispers fell silent. My hand hovered over the call button. But before I could touch it, the light above the elevator blinked. And the doors slid open on their own. Inside was me. Standing perfectly still. Smiling with someone else's smile. I staggered back, heart slamming against my ribs. The figure inside, my double, raised its hands slowly, beckoning me forward. Its eyes were too wide, the whites too bright, and when it opened its mouth, I heard the sound of typing. Clack, clack, clack. From lab 3. The doors closed. The hallway went dark. And I ran. When I finally made it back to the real elevator, panting, blood pounding in my ears, I slammed the button for ground. The doors shut. The display blinked red. B2. And I realized I hadn't brought the false card with me. It had stayed behind. On purpose. I stopped sleeping after my second visit to B2. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw myself, my double, standing in that rusted hallway, smiling with someone else's grin. And every morning, I woke up with bruises on my arms that hadn't been there before. Handprints. I started to wonder if I was the dream. The laminated rule sheet had become a curse. I couldn't stop reading it. The letters seemed darker every time, as though they were burned into the plastic. Rule number 1. If a test subject speaks in your voice, pull the alarm and evacuate immediately. Do not hesitate. That one haunted me most of all. Because lately when I walked past the test cells, I could hear them. Not whispers. Not screams. But my own voice. Calm. Patient. Saying things I didn't remember saying. Don't forget your badge, Elias. You're almost there. Just step inside. It'll be easier this time. I told myself I wouldn't break. Not like the others. But rules only work when you believe they're keeping you safe. And lately I wasn't sure anymore. It all came to a head on the night of the blackout. I was on a double shift, sitting in the monitoring room when the camera suddenly went static. Every single feed. Not at 3:15 a.m. when it always happened. But at 11 p.m. early, unexpected. The rule sheet fell out of my pocket. I bent to pick it up. And froze. Because the reflection in the darkened monitor wasn't moving. It was still sitting there, staring back at me with a frozen grin even as I stood. Rule number 2. Broken. The alarms blared. Red lights flooded the corridors. I stumbled out of the room, heart slamming against my ribs, and almost crashed into Mason. Elias, he shouted. What did you do? I didn't. But the look on his face told me everything. The rules weren't suggestions. They were seals. Chains. And I just snapped one. The lab wasn't the same after that. The walls seemed thinner, almost breathing. The test subjects no longer stayed behind their glass. They stood pressed against it, their lips moving soundlessly in perfect sync. I couldn't hear them through the barrier. But I could read the words. Rule number 3. Never read the test data in full. The last tech who did won't stop screaming. And I realized they weren't warning me anymore. They were taunting me. That was when I made the mistake of opening the file. The restricted one, the one they told us never to touch. Data underscore infinity. The screen filled with text, line after line of rules, thousands of them endless. Not just ours. Not just the 8 I knew. But rules from other labs, other places, other times. Some made no sense. Never whistle after midnight in the greenhouse. If the bus driver smiles, get off at once. When the clock strikes 13, don't look at the hands. And then I found the one that made my blood run cold. If you are reading this, you have already failed. The monitor went black. The building shook. A low groan rose from deep below, rattling the vents and lights. And the elevator dinged. Doors opening where no one had pressed the button. When I looked, the display was waiting for me. B2. Mason grabbed my arm. Don't. But I couldn't stop myself. The false badge was back in my pocket, warm against my skin. I pulled it out, held it up. The picture had changed again. This time it showed me and Mason standing in front of the open elevator, one of us stepping inside. I couldn't tell which. We rode down together. The doors opened. The hallway stretched out, longer than ever, the whispers rising like a tide. They no longer said my name. They said the rules. All of them, over and over, in hundreds of voices. We walked past the rusted pipes, the dripping walls, the doors marked with numbers that didn't exist. Until we came to the end. The exit elevator waited just as before. Its doors opened. And inside stood the test subjects. All of them. But they weren't behind glass anymore. They weren't even separate anymore. They were one thing. A mass of limbs and faces, shifting and stretching, every mouth moving in unison. Speaking. In my voice. Mason screamed and ran. I didn't. Because I finally understood. The rules weren't protecting us from them. They were protecting them from us. We weren't studying the subjects. We were the subjects. And B2 was the observation deck. The thing inside the elevator stretched out a hand, palm open, fingers too long. And for the first time I didn't resist. I stepped forward. The last thing I remember before the doors shut was my reflection in the steel walls. It didn't lag anymore. It was perfectly in sync. Smiling. I don't know if I ever left the lab. Or if I'm still there behind the glass, speaking in someone else's voice. But I do know this. If you ever find yourself working in a place with rules laminated in plastic, follow them. Because once you break one, you'll see why they were written. And by then it'll be too late.